If you're among those who consider women enigmatic and indecipherable, you're on the verge of discovering something that will fundamentally shift how you see things. There exists a cognitive pattern, a mental blind spot that affects all women universally. And when you grasp it, you'll possess a tool so remarkably potent, so devastatingly practical, that you'll question why this was never shared with you earlier. However, I must caution you, what follows isn't suitable for those seeking comfortable reassurances. This involves psychological principles applied to romantic dynamics, and should you choose to implement this understanding, the path forward changes permanently. So, engage with this content if you're prepared for unfiltered truth, and steel yourself, because we're venturing into the deepest aspects of feminine desire. Understand this. For decades, men have accepted that women were intricate, erratic, nearly beyond comprehension. We heard repeatedly that every woman represents her own universe, that successful approaches with one fail with another, that outcomes hinge on fortune or physical attributes. Yet this entire narrative is false, a soothing falsehood maintaining most men in darkness, while a select few who comprehend the actual dynamics attract exceptional women seemingly without effort. The reality is that every woman, without exception, exhibits the same fundamental error, a miscalculation so basic, so embedded within their mental wiring, that avoiding it becomes nearly impossible for them. And this miscalculation is, women mistake emotional turbulence for genuine rapport. Allow me to emphasize this, as understanding it clearly is essential. Women don't develop feelings for the appropriate person. They develop feelings for whoever generates powerful emotions within them, even when those emotions carry negative undertones. This indicates that someone who triggers apprehension, doubt, envy, or nervousness possesses greater influence over her than someone who provides consistency, reliability, and predictability. And before you interpret this as advocating harmful behavior, let me clarify something crucial. I'm not suggesting mistreating anyone. I'm discussing recognizing a psychological mechanism and employing it thoughtfully. Machiavelli grasped this 5 centuries ago, declaring that being feared surpasses being loved when having both proves impossible. Because fear constitutes a far more compelling emotion than tepid fondness. Most men execute the complete opposite. They attempt being agreeable, accommodating, foreseeable. They believe that through sufficient goodness, adequate interest demonstration, and constant availability, she ultimately recognizes their worth. Yet what they're actually accomplishing is becoming emotionally monotonous. They generate zero intensity, zero emotional variation, zero internal turbulence. Consequently, they dissolve into the background of her primitive consciousness, the portion that genuinely determines attraction. So how do you leverage this weakness advantageously? This is where tactical thinking commences. When you comprehend that she mistakes emotional turbulence for connection, your objective isn't providing stability and tranquility. Your objective is becoming a reliable generator of emotional peaks and valleys. Not in ways that transform you into something pathological, but in ways preventing her mind from categorizing you as mundane or foreseeable. And here's the initial principle requiring application: the method of emotional polarity. This indicates never maintaining one singular emotional wavelength. When you're perpetually warm, she acclimates to it. When you're perpetually remote, she abandons hope. However, when you oscillate between warmth and coolness, between attentiveness and detachment, between accessibility and absence, her mind enters confused territory that registers as powerful attraction. Let me provide a tangible illustration. Suppose you experienced an exceptional exchange with someone. Both of you connected, the chemistry was undeniable, everything seemed flawless. The error 99% of men commit is attempting to sustain that identical intensity level. They contact her the following day with matching eagerness. They seek another encounter promptly. They desire more of that positive emotional elevation. Yet the man who comprehends the dynamics does something contrasting. Following that perfect interaction, he vanishes for 48 to 72 hours. He doesn't obstruct her, he simply establishes zero contact. And when she ultimately contacts him, which she will, he responds casually as though nothing remarkable transpired. What just occurred within her consciousness? She transitioned from an emotional summit into uncertainty's valley. Her mind begins attempting to comprehend why he isn't pursuing her following such an exceptional night. And that inquiry, that enigma, generates an obsession far more potent than if he'd continued being the eager, constantly available person. This is what Machiavelli would characterize as maintaining your connections in controlled dependency, never providing sufficient security for complete relaxation. Now, the subsequent principle carries equal importance: irregular reinforcement. It's a framework borrowed directly from behavioral science, specifically from laboratory experiments involving rodents and mechanisms. When pressing a mechanism consistently yields rewards, you eventually lose interest. However, when pressing the mechanism sometimes yields rewards and sometimes doesn't, you become compelled. You continue pressing compulsively because you cannot predict when the subsequent reward arrives. Women operate identically regarding masculine approval. When you consistently praise her, constantly tell her she's attractive, perpetually appear impressed, it forfeits all potency. However, when you occasionally praise her and occasionally challenge her, when you sometimes make her feel valued and sometimes behave as though she doesn't particularly impress you, she becomes compelled by the concept of earning your approval. And here's the masterful element: when you provide approval, it must follow her earning it somehow. Don't praise her merely for existing. Praise the particular actions you wish to encourage. When she initiates contact, when she makes effort to connect, when she presents herself well for you, that's when you deliver the approval surge. However, when she behaves indifferently, when she plays games, when she tests you, that's when you mirror indifference, not as retribution, but as reflection. This establishes what's termed a variable reinforcement pattern, and it's precisely the mechanism making people compelled by gambling machines. She never anticipates when your approval arrives, so she continuously attempts behaving in ways that earn it, and throughout that entire process, you maintain complete control over the relationship's emotional rhythm. Now, the third principle is the most calculated, yet also the most powerful: the implantation of tactical uncertainty. Before you interpret this as heartless, let me explain the underlying psychology. Women, particularly the most attractive ones, are accustomed to men pursuing them. They're accustomed to being the reward, the one controlling dynamics. And when someone appears who declines participating in that pattern, who doesn't behave as though she's the greatest thing that ever occurred to him, something fractures within her thinking. Suddenly, she begins questioning herself. Why is this person not impressed? What does he possess that makes him not require my approval? Are there other women? Would I even satisfy him? And these questions, these uncertainties, are like compelling poison. The more she attempts answering them, the more she invests her thoughts in you. And the more she contemplates you, the more she convinces herself that something exceptional must characterize you if she's this captivated. So how do you plant these seeds? Subtly, never in obvious ways. For instance, if she inquires about your weekend activities, don't provide complete answers. State something like, "I spend time with some friends." It was worthwhile, then let her imagination complete the picture. Or if you're conversing and you casually mention that someone messaged you, don't elaborate anything. Simply continue the dialogue. These minor information gaps make her wonder what you're withholding, and her mind automatically presumes it must be significant. This is pure information management, a method Machiavelli would have appreciated. Never disclose everything. Mystery equals power. And within attraction context, mystery transforms into obsession because her mind is designed to solve riddles. And if you're a riddle she cannot fully solve, she never tires of attempting. Now, let me address the fourth principle, and this one distinguishes novices from experts: the management of the emotional framework. The framework is simply whoever defines the interaction's reality. In most relationships, the woman manages the framework because the man responds to her emotional conditions. If she's content, he's content. If she's disturbed, he panics attempting repairs. That indicates he's existing inside her framework. However, when you manage the framework, the dynamic completely reverses. She begins responding to your emotional conditions. If you're composed and centered, she feels everything's acceptable. If you create distance, she feels worry. If you display disapproval, she feels she must modify something. And whoever manages the emotional framework in the relationship is whoever possesses the power. How do you accomplish this? First, never respond emotionally to her games or her turbulence. If she attempts provoking reactions with envy, with indifference, or with emotional tests, you remain completely stable. Not because you suppress emotions, but because they genuinely don't affect you. She can experience her emotional tempest, but you remain the immovable foundation. Second, you're the one defining what's acceptable and what isn't, not through speeches or ultimatums, but through your actions. If she does something you don't value, you simply create distance. No turbulence, no extensive explanations, just natural outcomes. And when she behaves in ways you do value, you provide her more of your time and more of your attention. This molds her behavior without her ever realizing she's being molded. And here's the aspect most men never grasp. Managing the framework doesn't mean being domineering. It means being so solid in your own reality that others naturally synchronize to it. It's choosing to be the central force instead of an orbiting body. Orbiting bodies circle the central force, not the reverse. And when you're the central force in the dynamic, she naturally orbits around your energy. However, there's something additional you must understand about this fundamental female miscalculation. It's not merely that they mistake intensity for connection. It's that their mind is biologically configured to search for particular indicators of masculine worth. And those indicators rarely correspond with what they consciously claim to want. Consciously, she tells you she wants someone who's considerate, respectful, who listens, who's her closest companion. However, unconsciously, her primitive mind is scanning for signals of social dominance, selection by other women, the capacity to provide resources, and most of all, genetics worth transmitting to subsequent generations. And these signals are communicated through high-status behaviors, not through compliant ones. So when you understand that her true error is trusting her conscious mind, instead of recognizing what her unconscious mind actually responds to, you gain a direct pathway into her attraction mechanism. You're not attempting to convince her logical mind that you're a worthy choice. That is a complete time waste. Instead, you activate directly those biological attraction triggers, and how do you do that? Through 3 demonstrations of elevated worth. First demonstration, emotional self-sufficiency. This indicates your happiness, your peace, your sense of purpose don't depend on her. You have a life that's engaging and satisfying with or without her. When she senses that you don't require her to feel whole, paradoxically, she begins feeling a stronger need for you. Because humans value what's difficult to obtain and devalue what comes easily. Second demonstration, leadership without requesting permission. When you're together, you're the one making the decisions not in a domineering way, but in a natural, grounded, effortless way. You're the one suggesting the location. You're the one guiding the conversation. You're the one establishing the rhythm. You don't ask her every few minutes what she wants to do. You simply lead and provide her the freedom to follow or not. Most of the time, she follows because it's refreshing to be with someone who knows his direction. Third demonstration, perceived alternatives. This doesn't mean you become promiscuous or boast about other women. It means that through your body language, your confidence, your lifestyle, you project the image of someone who has choices. Someone who is with her because he chooses to be, not because she's his sole option. And this perception completely shifts the power dynamic. Now, I want to share with you an authentic story that illustrates all of this perfectly. I knew someone, let's call him Marco, who was the perfect embodiment of the nice, compliant man. A dedicated worker, respectful, always attempting to make women happy, and always ending up in the friend zone or utilized as the emotional support while they chased men who treated them worse. One day, after yet another brutal rejection, Marco decided he'd had enough. He came to see me and I explained to him exactly what I'm explaining to you now. I told him, the problem isn't that you a good person, the problem is that you predictable, compliant, and emotionally transparent. You generate zero emotional intensity, you're like tepid water, and nobody is obsessed with tepid water. So Marco did something radical. He stopped pursuing. He stopped being constantly available. He stopped attempting to impress. And most importantly, he stopped giving women unearned approval. If he liked someone, he would still invite her out. However, if she played games or showed disinterest, He would withdraw immediately, no turbulence. He didn't plead, he didn't ask what he did wrong. He simply continued with his life. And do you know what occurred? Within 3 months, Marco had more options with women than he had ever had in his entire life. Not because he suddenly became more physically attractive or wealthier, but because he completely changed his energy. He became a challenge. He became someone who generated emotional intensity through his unpredictability and his solid framework. One of those who had previously friend-zoned him suddenly started seeking him, asking why he had changed, telling him she missed him. And Marco, applying everything he learned, didn't fall into the trap of running back. He told her casually that he was busy with his life, but that maybe they could see each other sometime. That maybe drove her insane, because now she was in the role of the pursuer, attempting to win back the attention she once received effortlessly. This is exactly what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that the end justifies the means. I'm not telling you to manipulate out of cruelty. I'm telling you that if you want different outcomes, you need different tactics. And if the tactic of being the nice, compliant person hasn't worked, then it is time to play the actual game. Now let me reveal the error within the error, because women don't just mistake emotional intensity for connection. They also mistake their own worry for love. When a woman feels worried about someone, when she can't stop contemplating him, when she checks her phone compulsively waiting for a message, she interprets these symptoms of worry as signs that she is deeply in love. However, that isn't love, it is compulsion. It's this very worry that releases dopamine in an irregular pattern, because she cannot predict when the next dose of attention from this person will come. And you can create this compulsion by being the source of the irregular reinforcement I mentioned earlier. You don't need to be cruel, you only need to be inconsistent in your emotional availability. And here is the truly calculated part. Once she enters this state of compulsive worry, she will rationalize any behavior you have. If you disappear for days, she say you're mysterious. If you're cold, she say you're a challenge. If you show interest in other women, she say you're desired. Her mind rewrites the narrative to justify why she's so captivated, because admitting that it's compulsion and not love is too painful for her ego to accept. This is pure psychology, it's not theory, it's how the human mind actually functions. And the men who understand this, the ones who see beyond words and read behavioral patterns, hold a brutal advantage in the game of attraction. Because while other men try to be what she says she wants, you become what her biology actually responds to. Now, the last principle I want to give you before we conclude is this: the power of tactical withdrawal. Most men do not know when to pull back. They keep insisting, pleading, attempting to fix things that cannot be fixed. However, the man who understands the game knows that sometimes the most powerful move is to walk away completely. When you withdraw, especially when she expects you to chase, her mind panics. All the rules she believed about how men behave collapse instantly, and this mental chaos creates the perfect space where obsession grows like a weed. Suddenly, she starts wondering what she has lost. She begins remembering only the best moments. She starts idealizing what you two once had, and when she finally reaches out, because she will, the power is now entirely on your side. This is what is called a tactical sacrifice in chess. Sometimes you lose a piece to win the entire game. And in the game of attraction, sometimes you walk away from someone so she ends up running after you. However, this only works if your withdrawal is authentic. If she senses that you're pulling back as a manipulative tactic, it loses all of its power. It must come from a place of genuine indifference. Machiavelli understood this well when he advised the prince that it is better to appear pious than to actually be pious. In the game of seduction, it is better to appear authentically indifferent than to act indifferent. And the only way to achieve this is to build a life so rich, so abundant, that no individual woman has the power to emotionally destabilize you. So what is the conclusion of all this? The mistake all women make is trusting their conscious mind when their attraction is controlled by their unconscious mind. It is mistaking emotional intensity for genuine love. It is seeking stability while secretly craving emotional chaos. And when you understand this miscalculation, when you can see it clearly in every interaction, you possess a playbook that most men will never even imagine exists. However, with great power comes great responsibility. You can use this knowledge to manipulate and hurt, or you can use it to build relationships where both people win. You can be the person who plays with emotions without caring about the consequences, or you can be the person who understands psychology and chooses to use it with integrity. The choice is yours. However, here is what I can tell you. Once you see the matrix, you can never unsee it. You will start noticing these patterns everywhere. You will see how women chase the men who ignore them. You will see how they lose interest in the men who adore them. You will see how they mistake worry for passion. And armed with this knowledge, you will never again be the person who wonders why he always ends up in the friend zone. So I leave you with a question. Are you going to keep playing the game the way you were told to play it, as the nice person who finishes last, or will you start playing the game the way it actually works, by understanding the deep psychology that governs female attraction? The difference between these two paths is the difference between a life of romantic frustration and a life of abundance with women. You decide. If this content twisted your mind, leave me a comment below and tell me what struck you the most. Was it irregular reinforcement, emotional framework management, tactical withdrawal? Tell me which tactic you're going to apply first. And if you want more content like this, content that tells you the unfiltered truth about how attraction really works, subscribe to the channel because what comes next will go even deeper. Remember, knowledge is power, but only if you apply it. Don't just consume information, go out and put these principles to the test. And when you start seeing results, when you watch dynamics shift in your favor, you will realize that everything you were told about women was a comforting lie. The truth is darker, more complex, but far more effective. See you in the next content piece.